if you followed me for any time at all, it's pretty obvious that I focus a lot on hunting. Now, that's not to say I've had other influences. And I need to frame that for you first, because it's the individual experiences that matter in developing someone, right? I've met hundreds of bow hunters in my life. I got to see a lot of different styles of shooting before it became a big controversial subject, right? And what I did was form a method based around pressure testing under simulated hunting situations for making my shot system, my shooting system that works for me, for Grant, work. Now, when I'm coaching somebody, I'll bring them up with a good foundation, how to grip the bow, how to index the grip the same way each time. I'll shoot another video on that. But indexing means I'm holding it the same way every time I pick it up and shoot it, or as close as possible as I can. If there's anything that I really try to emphasize with folks, it's their hold. Because that's where I find a lot of people encounter problems. It's not with how they draw or where they anchor, if they shoot split finger or 3 under, or all those other things. A lot of it has to do with their hold and actually how they're indexing that each time. It has a lot to do with it, right? It has a lot to do with the grip on the bow as well, right? Because you got to train the grip. This is a mid to high wrist grip on this Demon Howard high speed, the 72 I shoot right now, right? A lot of bows back then had that, right? A lot of bows these days are very, very low wrist. Well, why? Well, the industry's picked up on the fact that a lot of folks come from a wheelbore or a compound, which has a very, very low wrist grip, which requires a different way of indexing it, okay? Now, moving along to the aiming thing, the whole aiming thing. For my way of developing someone into having a shooting system that fits the individual, I emphasize specific drills to get them there based around focus, concentration, and target acquisition. Now, these drills overlap each other, but they develop and train an individual for the attributes that are necessary to shoot instinctively, right? Now, a lot of people say, you know, what is instinctive? I'm just looking, and some people say, oh, you see the arrow. Some people say you don't see the arrow. I'm not psychic, right? So I'm not going to predict what one person sees from the next person, because that's impossible. But what I can do is assess at what level their individual attributes for shooting that bow for bow hunting is at. And I can assess that by putting them through a series of drills. And the first drills I'll put someone through generally, even if they're just starting out, is I want to see how much focus they have. Are they distracted easily while they're shooting? Is there a lot of self-talk going on? Is it negative? Is it positive? Is it ego? I have no interest in trying to shoot at a target that's 100 yards away, right? I have no interest in that personally. I want to be able to hit a live animal effectively and ethically and narrow the gap of anomalies that can and will happen, even when hunting with a rifle, down with my bow and my shooting system to as narrow a margin as possible. Why am I doing that? Because that gets my confidence going when I'm actually about to shoot. And in my mind, I've gotten to a point now, especially in the last 20 years, I have let the string down and dropped the string, I should say, on a heck of a lot less animals than I did when I was younger. Why? Isn't just because I've gotten wiser. I've gotten extremely discerning about my shot. And if I decide to release the arrow, I am absolutely 100% positive that that arrow is going to drop where I want it to go. And that's going to be a good hit on that animal, right? As you can tell, I'm a big fan of positive mental attitude. What develops that? Having a good structure and foundation, and if you want to shoot instinctive, doing drills that develop the attributes that make instinctive work. The two primary attributes are focus and concentration. Being able to really focus and not be distracted in your shooting process. What matters is how much complete control you have in focusing. Why am I so crazy for Instinctive when it comes to your grip index. I'm obsessed with grip index because the way I shoot, I did not learn from shooting a bow. I use an English shotgunning method called the Churchill method, adapted to how I use my bow. For something that is moving and you're tracking it until it stops like a white-tailed deer, I track that animal just like I would swing a bird with a shotgun. And this is the hand that does all the pointing. This stabilizes your trigger. Your release from your anchor is equivalent to that trigger. Okay? Now stay with me on this for a minute. I am lining up. I have good alignment. When I was younger, I had an over and under that I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with. My father, being a gunsmith, chopped the stock down, measured it out for me before chopping it down, and put a different recoil pad on it. And I couldn't miss with it after that. Why? Alignment. You sort of see where this is starting to fit together a little bit? Okay? People ask me all the time, why the heck would you hunt pheasants or ducks with a bow? Well, apart from being restricted in some of the areas that I hunted in and still hunt in, of not being able to discharge a shotgun, it was a heck of a lot of fun. And guess what it did? Made me a much better archer and bow hunter. And that's where getting close starts to come in, but that's for another video. I'm trying to kind of give you the thesis on my approach to my instinctive shooting system that I teach, right? And I develop for folks. And I got to say, I've been very successful doing so. One of the big parts of that, though, is foundation, structure, and then I give them the attribute training with which to build their own house, right? Because they're individuals. I've got several compound folks I've trained in the last few years here that shoot both compound and recurve or longbow in the season as it suits them. And guess what? They do it fairly well. They didn't have to drop it cold turkey, right? One day they feel like picking up the wheelbow, and the next day they pick up the recurve or the longbow, and they can shoot them effectively. The difference between the two? Well, it's a margin of range. One range they feel very effective in with one, and another maybe they want to maybe poke out a little bit more with the compound, right? But each person's effective lethal range is very personal, and that usually varies anywhere between 10 and 20 yards. Now, where did I get this idea of attribute development training from? Martial arts and pressure testing martial arts, right? Seeing if it actually works. And I have adapted that to a shooting system for instinctive aiming. I started getting a heck of a lot better when I started drilling for specificity. What do I mean by that? Isolating certain components of my shooting game. Now, the other part of this is, in doing this and teaching the shooting system, is teaching people to use their arrow as their coach. Videotaping themselves is one thing, but watching that arrow flight is another. And videotaping that arrow is as critical as watching yourself release 1,000 times. And quite often when I'm putting someone through our Tier 1 bow hunting boot camp, and I'm doing one-on-one and I'm doing coaching with them, quite often I'll be like, I don't need to just see what you're doing. I want to see what your arrow's doing. I want to see how it's striking the target. I want to see how it's flying, right? In some cases, the arrow may be not quite tuned the way it could be. Remember, with a traditional bow, you're tuning the arrow to the bow. With a compound, you're tuning the bow to the arrow, okay? I hope that helps people get their head around. And I've got to tell you, remember this, please. It doesn't matter what shooting system you do. You've got to practice. I don't care what style of aiming you do. You must practice it, right? I know people that are great gap shooters and great string walkers, great split vision shooters. I know great instinctive archers. But the bottom line is you need to remember that you still have to practice. And, you know, I watched an archer that my dad bow hunted with a lot when I was a kid. And apart from deer hunting, one of Mike's favorite animals to hunt was the snowshoe hare. He called them swampers or bunnies, swamp bunnies. Those are our varying hares we have that, of course, turn white in the winter here. And I was the flusher. I would get in between my dad and him, and I would push them out, and they would take shots. I watched him with a 75-pound Howard Hill ASL longbow, Howard Hill Big 5. I watched him pinwheel rabbit after rabbit as a kid, running at shots that were anywhere between 25 and 50 yards with that bow. And he was able to do it. And I've said this in my book before. How the heck, I asked him one day, how the heck do you do that? I needed to learn that. I needed to do it. He said, I point the bow, I look, the arrow goes where I look, the bow's pointing, and it connects. I just shoot. Now, I'm sure he developed that shooting method a lot by hunting rabbits under those conditions, right? But my point is that don't let anyone tell you Instinctive doesn't work. Don't knock it until you try it. I hope that helps answer some questions and frame things for my approach. It's all about developing the attributes that make instinctive aiming work. It's quite simple. Cheers.